Ready to get back into our Father's Word here at the chapel, the fourth book of Moses, the book of Numbers. Bamidbar in the Hebrew language, meaning in the wilderness. And this generation, what was probably supposed to be about a 2-year journey, including the stay over at Sinai to receive the law and God to prepare the people to move into Israel. It should have been about a 2-year trip altogether. And they left Egypt some 39 years ago at this point. So the journey has taken a lot longer than what God originally had intended. We're going to pick it up today, chapter 32, verse 6, if you care to get your Bible and join us today. Now, Israel had just defeated Sihon, the king of the Amorites, as well as the Midianites and a good part of the Moabites, if not all. And it left a big chunk of land on the east side of Jordan, and it was good land. It had good pastures and good water. And God kind of, I think, building the people's confidence a little bit with these victories over the enemy. And boy, shouldn't it build your confidence? The war with the Midianites, 12,000 going against an estimated army of 35 to 40,000, and not one Israelite was unaccounted for. In other words, not one Israelite killed. So if that didn't build your confidence, I don't know what would. But got a little issue that came up as we ended our last lecture, beginning in chapter 32, and that is the tribes of Gad and Reuben are petitioning Moses to allow them to stay on the east side of Jordan rather than moving into the land of Canaan. And Moses is very concerned about it. So with that, let's introduction. Let's ask a word of wisdom in Yeshua's precious name. Father, we ask you to open eyes, open ears this day. Numbers chapter 32, verse 6, and it reads, And Moses said unto the children of Gad and to the children of Reuben, Shall your brethren go to war, and shall ye sit here? And Moses is kind of reproving them a little bit here, and he's saying to your brethren are crossing over Jordan to fight against the Canaanites to take the land that God has given to us. And you're going to sit here? And was Moses mistaken in his accusation here? Well, a little bit more on that in a moment. Verse 7, Moses continues, And wherefore discourage ye the heart, or the minds, of the children of Israel from going over into the land which the Lord hath given them? We've been down this road before, Moses said. Back in chapter 14, do you remember when, and actually in chapter 13, they sent the spies into the promised land to check it out, and they came back and made up a false report. And then in chapter 14, the people of Israel said, let's appoint a captain and go back to Egypt. Out-and-out rebellion against our father. And Moses is afraid that the people of Gad and Reuben are going to cause the same fear to come across the people once again. Verse 8, Thus did your fathers when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. As I just mentioned, the 12 spies who went and checked out the land. Only Caleb and Joshua told the truth. The rest of them came back and said, we were like grasshoppers in their sights. There's giants over there. And broke the spirit of the people. For when they went up into the valley of Eshcol meaning cluster of grapes, and saw the land, they discouraged the heart, or the minds, of the children of Israel. And they should not go into the land which the Lord hath given them. And you may recall the Lord commanded them to go into the promised land and take it. They refused. Then the Lord said, Get ye down by the way of the Red Sea. In other words, don't go fight the Canaanites, because he had already sentenced them to die in the wilderness because they had tempted him 10 times. Well, what did they do the morning after he told them to go down by the way of the Red Sea? Well, when he told them to go fight, they wouldn't. And he told them not to go fight. They got up early and armed themselves and went up to Canaan and got their gourds thumped by the Canaanites because God wasn't with them. Verse 10. And the Lord's anger was kindled the same time, and he sware, saying, in fact, the Lord was so angry, if not for the intercession of Moses, he probably would have struck the whole nation dead at that time rather than having them wander around in this desert for 40 years. Verse 11, surely none of the men that came up out of Egypt from 20 years old and upward shall see the land which I swear unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob, because they have not wholly followed me. One whole generation condemned to die in the wilderness because out and out rebellion. It was God's will that they go into the promised land. And again, Moses' concern here is that the Gadites and the Reubenites are saying, we don't want to go into the promised land. We want to take our land of milk and honey, our inheritance over here on the east side. Verse 12, save Caleb, or except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and note the Z there, we're not talking about Kenites. Caleb was of the tribe of Judah, and Joshua, the son of Nun, for they have wholly followed the Lord. In Numbers 14:24, God said Caleb had a different spirit than the rest of them, and wholly followed me. And Joshua supported Caleb soon after. Verse 13, and the Lord's anger was kindled against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness 40 years, until all the generation that had done evil in the sight of the Lord was consumed. And think about it, at this time, there are very few of that generation still alive. Moses, certainly one of them, but if you consider they were all 19 years old or less, the ones who will go into the promised land, except for Caleb and Joshua and a few others, there's no one in this nation that's over 40 years old. 60 years old, because if they were 19 and then they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, the very oldest could be 59. Verse 14, and behold, ye are risen up in your father's stead. You're doing the same thing that your previous generation did. An increase of sinful men, or a multitude, to augment or increase yet the fierce anger of the Lord toward Israel. You're doing the same exact thing that your fathers did, provoking the Lord to anger by refusing to go into the promised land. Verse 15, for if ye turn away from after him, this is from the Lord, he will yet again leave them in the wilderness, and ye shall destroy all this people. Another entire generation possibly sentenced to die in the wilderness, and still not going into the promised land. If that had happened, it would have taken them 80 years from the time that they left Egypt till they made it into the promised land. That wasn't God's plan at all. Verse 16, and they came near unto him. These are the Gadites and the Reubenites going to negotiate with Moses a little bit, and said, we will build sheepfolds here for our cattle and cities for our little ones. In other words, we'll fortify and rebuild some of the cities that we've taken from the Midianites, the Moabites, and the Amorites. And then, of course, at this time, a sheepfold could have been built rather quickly. Most of them were simply rocks piled one upon another. So let us prepare to leave our little ones and our herds here, is what they're saying. 17, but we ourselves will go ready armed before the children of Israel, until we have brought them unto their place of inheritance. and our little ones shall dwell in the fenced cities because of the inhabitants of the land. And most of the major armies of that region have been defeated already by the Israelites. But you don't leave your little ones and your wives and your herds and your flocks unprotected. And at this time, a walled city you could protect even with very few men, because a walled city, you could think of it as a fortress or a castle. It's amazing what some heavy stones and some boiling oil will do, as how quickly it will discourage those who might try and have intentions on breaking into the palace, the castle, or the fortress. Verse 18, we will not return unto our houses until the children of Israel have inherited every man his inheritance. All of our enemies in Canaan will be defeated before we return home, and that would be fulfilled in Joshua chapter 22, verses 3 and 4. The promise fulfilled. 19, for we will not inherit with them on yonder side Jordan, or forward or further, because our inheritance is fallen to us on this side Jordan eastward. Now this yonder side Jordan in phraseology in the Bible normally refers to the east side of Jordan, but in this case they're on the east side of Jordan, so they're talking about we don't want our inheritance in the land of Canaan on the west side of Jordan if we can have our inheritance here on the east side of Jordan. Good pasture and good water. Verse 20, and Moses said unto them, if, condition, note, ye will do this thing, if ye will go armed before the Lord to war. You know, they said in a previous verse, 17, that they would go before Israel to war. And Moses is saying, go before the Lord. Back when their ancestors had decided on chapter 14, after God said, get you down by the way of the Red Sea, don't fight against the Canaanites, they decided, no, we're going. They didn't take the Ark of the Covenant with them, and Moses wasn't with them when they got their gourds thumped. This time, Moses pointing out, the Lord will be going among you. 21. And will go, all of you, armed over Jordan before the Lord, until he hath driven out his enemies from before him. In other words, before the Lord. And the Lord told the people of Israel from the get-go, I will go ahead of you. I will deliver your enemies into your hand. It was unbelief on the part of the previous generation that caused them to spend 40 years and die in the wilderness rather than enter the promised land. 22, and the land be subdued before the Lord. Then afterward ye shall return and be guiltless before the Lord and before Israel. And this land shall be your possession before the Lord. If you'll do what you promised and go and help your brethren defeat the Canaanites, then I will grant you your wish that you can take your inheritance here on the east side of Jordan without any sin or guilt. 23, but, there's always a but if ye will not do so, behold, ye have sinned against the Lord and against your brethren Israel, as it's stated in verse 22. Ye have sinned against the Lord, and be sure your sin will find you out. And that's the way it is when you sin against Yahweh, the God of heaven and earth. It will be found out, because there is no place that you can hide your sin from the Lord. Verse 24, build you cities for your little ones, and folds for your sheep, and do that which hath proceeded out of your mouth. We've come to an agreement here you proceed with the work and fortify and rebuild the cities. And the children of Gad and the children of Reuben spake unto Moses, saying, Thy servants will do as my Lord commandeth. This word Lord is Adon in the Hebrew. It means sovereign or controller, and it's speaking of Moses as leader of the nation. Verse 26, Our little ones, our wives, our flocks, and our cattle shall be there in the cities of Gilead, somewhat protected on the east side of Jordan. Again, the majority of the armies of the major nations there had already been wiped out and defeated. 27, But thy servants, this is the people of Gad and Reuben, the fighting men, will pass over, in other words, over Jordan, every man armed for war, before the Lord to battle, as my Lord saith. And I think now they've got it. And, you know, I kind of posed the question, was Moses out of line in questioning the Gadites and Reubenites there at first? Will you sit here while your brethren go to war? And I don't think Moses was out of line, because did you hear the people of Gad, the men of Gad or the Reubenites go, What are you talking about? Do you think we would sit over here and while our brethren go over and fight against the Canaanites? Somewhat insulted by even the notion. No, you didn't hear a peep out of them until Moses reproved them and said, look, this is the way it is. If you want to take your possession over here, you're going to help fight and take the land of Canaan. And that's when they came around and said, okay, you've got a deal. 28, So concerning them, Moses commanded Eleazar, the priest, the high priest, in fact, at this time, and Joshua, who would replace Moses, the son of Nun, and the chief fathers of the tribes of the children of Israel. Moses knew that he would not be around to make sure that the Reubenites and the Gadites kept their part of the bargain, so he's going to restate the agreement in front of witnesses who would be there. And Moses said unto them, If the children of Gad and the children of Reuben will pass with you over Jordan, every man armed to battle, before the Lord, and the land shall be subdued before you, on the west side, in other words, then ye shall give them the land of Gilead for a possession. Gilead on the east side of Jordan. And Eleazar and Joshua would also be responsible for dividing the land into allotments. And of course, ultimately God responsible for that, because they drew lots as far as who was going to get what land. But the land that Gad and Reuben are asking for will not be divided down to the families until such time as Canaan has been defeated and subdued, and then when they cross back over Jordan sometime later, verse 30. But if they will not pass over with you armed, they shall have possessions among you in the land of Canaan. They will have broken their agreement at that time, and therefore, just like the rest of Israel, they will take their possession in the land of Canaan on the west side of Jordan. And the children of Gad, in other words, they're going to go fight the Canaanites one way or the other. 31. And the children of Gad and the children of Reuben answered, saying, As the Lord hath said unto thy servants, so we will do. And this possibly just repeated here as confirmation that they're agreeing by their own word with Eleazar and Joshua and the other heads of families as witness. 32. We will pass over armed before the Lord unto the land of Canaan, that the possession of our inheritance on this side, the east side of Jordan, may be ours. Verse 33, And Moses gave unto them, even to the children of Gad, and to the children of Reuben, and unto half the tribe of Manasseh, the son of Joseph, the kingdom of Sihon, king of the Amorites, and the kingdom of Og, king of Bashan, the land with the cities thereof in the coast or borders, even the cities of the country round about. The cities named and mentioned, but also applies to the villages and the land surrounding the cities. Now note, half of the tribe of Manasseh is going to take inheritance on the east side, but they weren't part of the original petition to Moses at the beginning of this chapter. It was Gad and Reuben only. And I think here that the Lord is giving that because they, as we'll see in verse 39, were responsible for helping conquer Gilead and Bashan. So the tribes, Reuben, 43,730 at the last numbering in chapter 26. Gad, 45,500. Manasseh, 52,700. Only half of them, approximately 26,350, I guess that would be, will be on the east side of Jordan. The other half directly across Jordan on the west side. 34. And the children of Gad built, or rebuilt, or fortified, better said, I think, Dibon and Ataroth and Aror, these being on the northeast of the plain of Moab. 35. And Atroth, Shofan, and Jazer, and Jogbehah, this area designated later and assigned to Gad. And Beth Nimrah, and Beth Haran, fenced cities, and folds for sheep. And these areas only generally assigned at this time. As I said, they won't be broken down by families or even tribes at this time. For we'll see that areas that the Reubenites fortified, the Gadites ended up with as their possession, and vice versa. Some of the cities that the Gadites rebuilt, when it came down to the actual assignment designation of whose land that was, it was the Reubenites. So that not done until the promised land had been subdued. 37. And the children of Reuben built Heshbon. Heshbon was the capital of Sihon, king of the Amorites, later relinquished to the Gadites, because it was situated on the border and given up by them to the Levites later as one of the cities of the Levites. And Elealeh and Kirjathaim. 38. And Nebo means prophet if you translate it, and would be the area where Moses last saw the promised land from before he passed. And Baal Meon, their names being changed. And Shibmah, which was Shebam, back in verse 3 of this same chapter, and gave other names unto the cities which they builded. And this is a little hard to understand. What happened was, as was often the case when a land was conquered, the names of the cities were changed. David, when he conquered Jebus, what did he do? He renamed the city Jerusalem. And that's what this is saying, is that the names of some of these cities were changed, but they didn't really hold over the course of history and went back to the original names. And the children of Machir, one of the largest, most powerful families of the Manassites, the son of Manasseh went to Gilead and took it and dispossessed the Amorite which was in it. Verse 40, and Moses gave Gilead unto Machir the son of Manasseh, and he dwelt there and this is a bad translation. What happened was the sons of Machir took Gilead and defeated the inhabitants, and then Moses gave it to them because they earned it. They didn't have it just laid in their lap. 41. And Jair, the son of Manasseh, went and took the small towns thereof, and called them Havoth Jair. Now, Jair was not a Manassite. He was of Judah. 1 Chronicles, I'll repeat, chapter 2, verse 21. Now, Haboth-Jair, he was the son of Segub of the tribe of Judah. Jair was. Now, the great-grandson of Manasseh on his mother's side was, in other words, he married, the man of Judah married one of the leading ladies of the tribe of Manasseh. And there must have been a pretty good dowry involved, because normally when a man married into another tribe, that inheritance became part of the man's tribe. Here it's not the case. It's Haboth-Jair. 42. And Nobah went and took Kenath and the villages thereof, and called it Nobah after his own name. He was a real humble kind of guy, you know. When he took the land, he just named it after himself. And his family never referred to, but probably belonged to one of the Machirites, because listed here along with the others of Manasseh. Chapter 33 we come to, and what we have in chapter 33 is a list of the encampment sites from the time that Israel came out of Egypt unto the point where we're at right now. So with that, let's pick it up, chapter 33, verse 1. These are the journeys, and this in the Hebrew, the journeys is masa, and it's departure, of the children of Israel, which went forth out of the land of Egypt with their armies under the hand of Moses and Aaron. And I think appropriate that these encampment sites are documented and listed here as Israel prepares to move into the promised land. And note that these are departure points, and so basically we're going to be going, they left point A and arrived at point B. They departed point B and arrived at point C. Verse 2, and Moses wrote their goings out according to their journeys by the commandment of the Lord. And these are their journeys according to their goings out. A permanent memorial, record, if you will, of God's grace even toward this rebellious generation who refused to believe Him, to trust in Him, and to go into the promised land. But, you know, their shoes didn't even wax old. God continued to make sure they had manna from heaven and water. He raised them up on His wings like a mother eagle carries her children, Deuteronomy chapter 32. And they departed, this is Israel, from Ramesses, this is in Egypt, in the first month of the 15th day of the first month. This would have been 1491 B.C. On the morrow after the Passover, the day after the very first Passover, the children of Israel went out with an high hand in the sight of all the Egyptians. Time and time again, Moses asked Pharaoh, let my people go. He would not do it. God had hardened his heart. But after the death angel passed over and slew the firstborn of everyone in Egypt, from Pharaoh all the way down to the prisoners in the dungeons, they decided it was time to let them go. That's what this means by a high hand. It wasn't by the power of the Israelites' own hands that they came out of Egypt. It was by the power of God's hand. Verse 4, for the Egyptians buried all their firstborn, which the Lord had smitten among them. Upon their gods also the Lord executed judgments. Well, a lot of scholars wrestle with this. How could God execute judgment on their gods, small g, when they were non-existent? Well, they were existent to the Egyptians. And by defeating the Egyptians in such a way, taking every firstborn in the entire land, that put the gods of Egypt to shame, and for sure. And a judgment passed on them. Verse 5, and the children of Israel removed from Ramesses and pitched in Succoth. Succoth means booths. Now, I'm not going to bore you with this chapter reading you. They left point A and arrived at point B, then they left point B and arrived at point C. Sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. And at this time, I'd like to go to our map, and we're going to just kind of briefly go over the travels of the nation of Israel as the Lord brought them out of the land of Egypt. Now, in this area is Egypt. Ramses is where Israel came out. They went south. By the way, on this map, if you have an Atlas of Bible Lands, an older copy, this is page 10. If you have the newer copy, it's on page 14 of Atlas of Bible Lands. Succoth, meaning booths. This is, and that's also, as many of you know, the name of the feast. The Feast of Tabernacles is Succoth, and they built booths there, I guess, and that's where the idea came from. Israel then went north. Now, where they crossed the Red Sea, and by the way, all of this in the blue is Red Sea, just different. This area here, the water is the Gulf of Suez, and now the Suez Canal goes ahead on up and connects with the Mediterranean. But biblical geographers have quite a discussion about where exactly Israel crossed the Red Sea. Does it matter really where they crossed? No, because we know that they did. How do we know that they did? Because God's Word tells us as much. Then they went south, and they came to an area, the exact location, somewhere in this area called Marah. This would be about, actually they came to Elam, the next place, in the second month of the first year. Elam would be where they would first start crying about not having any water, and actually the manna was first given to them there as well. The Amalekites would attack them in this area, the first to attack Israel after they came out of Egypt, the descendants of the grandson of Esau, the Amalekites. Then, in the third month of the first year, Israel arrived at Mount Sinai. They would remain at Mount Sinai until the 20th day of the second year. Sinai, of course, also called, known as different names, but Sinai is what we're going to go with today. Horeb being one of the ones, Mount Horeb. It's all part of the same range. Sinai, of course, where God gave Moses the law, all the instructions of the law given to Moses at Sinai, how the nation of Israel was to worship Yahweh, the activities of the priests, on, given there in almost a complete year that they were at Sinai, God preparing them to move into the promised land. When they departed from Sinai, in the 20th day of the second month of the second year, their next stop was Kibroth Hattaavah. Now, this is where people who came out of Egypt with them, and the people of Israel, started crying about, oh, we wish we had the garlic and the onions and the melons and the fish that we had in Egypt. All we have is this loathsome bread, this manna that they grew to despise when God was giving it to them to keep it alive. They wanted meat, and they asked for meat, and God gave it to them. An east wind came up and blew quail over them, and they ate quail until it came out of their nostrils. Kibroth Hattaavah, meaning graves of lust, because of the plague that came across those who lusted over the quail. Next stop was Hazareth, just a little bit north of Kibroth Hattaavah. This would be the location where Aaron and Miriam, mostly Miriam, the lead, would challenge Moses and say, why does the Lord speak directly only to Moses? We are prophets and prophetess as well. God struck her with leprosy for 7 days. If not for the interception of Moses, she probably would have stayed a leper. Then from there they went north and on up. One of the next stops was Kadesh Barnea. This in the very northern edge of the wilderness of Paran. The only thing separating the people of Israel at this time from the promised land, the wilderness of Zin, Z-I-N. And it was from Kadesh Barnea that Moses sent the 12 spies north into southern Canaan to check out the land to see what it was. That is the point where they would come back, tell the people at Kadesh Barnea that it was all of them lied except for Caleb and Joshua, and said they're like giants over there. We can't take them. Let's appoint a captain to take us back to Egypt. It infuriated God. God at that point sentenced them, that generation, to die in the wilderness. From that point, and it's thought, some think that some remained at Kadesh Barnea. I have difficulty believing that that was the case. I think all of them traveled together, and basically they just wandered around in the wilderness. What should have taken 2 years to get to the promised land ended up taking 40 years. They would come back to Kadesh Barnea a second time. From there was where they would send word, and about this area, the king of Edom, this area over on this side, the land of Edom. And you may recall they asked the king of Edom, can we travel on the king's highway and be a lot easier going? They forbid them to cross their land, and they had to circle around, basically skimming along the border of Edom. And it would be in this area that God sent the fiery serpents among the people of Israel, because they were crying and moaning and groaning, you brought us out in this wilderness to die. They skirted along the borders of Moab at that time, and of course at that time is when Balaam had the idea of Moab and the Midianites seducing Israel into worshiping their gods. That brought upon the wrath of God for sure, and if not for the zealousness of Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, more of Israel would have died as a result of that. And right now we're about at that point where here's the Jordan and Jericho right in this area. It won't be very many days at this point that Israel will be crossing over Jordan and taking Jericho and doing what God instructed them to do, moving into the promised land. This land over here, the land we've been talking about today, belonged to Ammon, the furthest in the north. Actually, the Amorites, the furthest in the north, then Ammon, Moab, and then you had the Edomites. At the time of King David, Israel would take all of this land all the way down to the Gulf of Aqaba in this area. So, again, I hope you will forgive me for doing it that way rather than boring you with reading. They went from point A to point B, and then from point C to point D. And when we come back in our next lecture, we're going to pick it up with verse 49 as we continue our study in this book of Numbers. So hope you're enjoying the book of Numbers. Just, I think, probably 2 more lessons, and we'll have worked our way through this book of Numbers once again. Got a brief message. We'll ask you to listen a moment, won't you please?